By 1836, the Bank of the United States was dead.
Unfortunately, Jackson did not have a substitute for the Bank of the United States, and this would cause a lot of problems in Martin Van Buren's administration.
Andrew Jackson's presidential legacy is, perhaps, the most complicated in American history. Without question, he changed the presidency, giving it more power by imposing his will on the economy, the government, the landscape, and the people. And by doing so, he forged the future of the nation.
Jackson was the only president where a whole age would be named after him, the age of Jackson. And as one journalist would write, that the coming generations would be very proud to be born in the age of Jackson.
But for the men who followed in his mighty wake, the age of Jackson would be a very bumpy ride. Under Andrew Jackson, the United States government was completely debt-free for the first and only time in history. He was the true father of Jackson's Democratic Party, having organized it in the 1820s. And he was Andrew Jackson's hand-picked heir in 1836. This endorsement gave him the election. Number 8, Martin Van Buren, Democrat, 1837 to 1841. Age 54, from New York.
Van Buren was the ultimate political protege and the ultimate political machine politician. The skills he had as kind of a backroom political organizer were great at making him a builder of a political party, but did not serve him so well in terms of actually leading the nation as president.
Van Buren loved the good life, and I think in a way that he wanted to treat the White House as a kind of reward for a lifetime of hard work. Unfortunately, history didn't cooperate.
He got branded with a reputation that was almost entirely undeserved, and that is he got the reputation of being somebody who was a kind of wannabe aristocrat and was decorating the White House with gold-edged faucets and golden goblets and things, none of which was true. But Van Buren conducted himself in such ways that it seemed like it might be true.
He's seen as a man who is characterized, at least anyway by his enemies, as an effete dandy. A man who perfumes his whiskers and who wears a corset. It's not the kind of image which is really going to work very well in the rough and tumble world of American politics of the 1830s and the 1840s.
When Van Buren took the oath, he certainly inherited the high hopes of Jackson's presidency. But he also inherited the financial ruins of Jackson's bank war.
No sooner is he inaugurated than the Panic of 1837 begins.
Van Buren got socked right off the bat with having to respond to an enormous crisis of unemployment, of bankruptcy, of economic depression in all its ways.
And it gets progressively worse as time goes on. In fact, there's another panic in 1839.
The one in 1839 was even worse. It was caused fundamentally by a glut in the cotton market. And of course, cotton production was the backbone of the American economy. So when the price of cotton collapsed, the American economy collapsed.
No president had ever had to deal with anything like this before. I don't know that any president would have been up to the job, but Van Buren certainly wasn't.
As a man who had spent his entire career straddling the fence on issues, Van Buren was incapable of making tough decisions, such as the annexation of Texas. He ducked that question, fearing it would inflame the brewing slavery issue. As for the ailing economy, he had no real plan.
By the time 1840 rolled around, the country was in such a deep depression that it would have been obvious to all observers that Van Buren was bound to lose, that the Whigs could have run anybody and beaten Van Buren, and if they had known that, the Whigs would have run Clay.
But instead of nominating Henry Clay for president, the new Whig Party chose William Henry Harrison because they believed he was the candidate who most resembled Andrew Jackson. Harrison had been a frontier general and an Indian fighter. But more importantly, he supported the rechartering of the Bank of the United States. The election of 1840 was a flamboyant affair, the first presidential campaign to feature open public rallies, songs, and slogans.
They would roll out the cider barrel when Van Buren's people would start to speak, as well as the image of the log cabin, and with chants of, Van, he's a used-up man. And they called Van Buren Martin Van Ruin.
In contrast, William Henry Harrison was touted by his old war nickname, which he got while fighting Indians at the Battle of Tippecanoe. Tippecanoe and Tyler too was the slogan. John Tyler, of course, was Harrison's running mate.
One of the great symbols of the campaign of 1840 is the log cabin. William Henry Harrison wasn't born in a log cabin, but nonetheless this becomes sort of the enduring symbol of that campaign. And another symbol that the Whigs manipulate very successfully is the image of the English coach that Martin Van Buren allegedly rides in. And the Harrison supporters like to sing, in English coaches he's no rider, but he can fight and drink hard cider.
Harrison took his lumps from the Van Buren camp as well. More than anything, they attacked his age.
People accused him of being too old and of being a sort of phony Jackson, a phony general. They even called him a granny general.
But ultimately, it was the economy that decided the election. Number 9, William Henry Harrison, Whig, March 4th to April 4th, 1841. 68 years old, from Ohio.
Poor Harrison felt it necessary to give a very long and learned inaugural address, probably because in the campaign it had been suggested that he was a simple homespun guy. Harrison decided that as a president he needed a different image.
Contrary to his campaign image, Harrison was hardly a backcountry bumpkin. He was an aristocrat, had a college education, and was the only president to study medicine. In taking the oath of office, Harrison wanted to remind people of his true background and dispel any adverse thoughts about his age. So he gave the longest inaugural address in American history, nearly 2 hours.
He insisted on speaking on a cold March day with no hat or overcoat. And somehow he caught a cold, and the cold turned to pneumonia. And in the end, the poor man died.
Just 31 days into his administration, William Henry Harrison became the first U.S. president to die in office. Vice President John Tyler was playing marbles at his home in Virginia when he learned of Harrison's death. He immediately went to Washington to assume the presidency. But there was no clear constitutional guideline for succession. That set the stage for another epic battle in American political history. After becoming president, John Tyler refused to name a vice president. He served his entire term without one. He was a Southern gentleman from the planter aristocracy with a rich background in politics. He'd served in the House of Representatives and the Senate, been governor of Virginia, and was a consummate Washington insider. He believed in states' rights and felt strongly, like Thomas Jefferson, that too much power had been vested in the federal government. And yet, also like Jefferson, he expanded that power once he became president. Number 10, John Tyler, Whig, 1841 to 1845, 51 years old, from Virginia.
One of the things that John Tyler's never really given enough credit for, I think, is the way he assumes all of the powers of the office upon Harrison's death. He gives an inaugural address 3 days after he takes the oath of office and essentially sends a message to members of the Whig Party and to the nation at large that he is in charge. And he proves that in the years that follow.
He was a thin man, delicate, blue eyes. He felt that Congress should make policy, and this gave many the impression of him being weak. And this was a great, great misconception.
John Tyler of Virginia turned out to be his own man, with his own political agenda, which surprised everyone. This became apparent from the get-go when Tyler faced immediate challenges to his newfound authority. He was derisively called his accidency or his ascendancy. Many believed he was just an acting president until a new election could be called. Even the members of his cabinet, which was really Harrison's cabinet, tried to muzzle Tyler's claim to power. In their first meeting, Secretary of State Daniel Webster told Tyler how the cabinet would make all executive decisions by consensus. To that, Tyler responded by asking for their cooperation or their resignations. For the Whigs, this was devastating. Harrison had promised to push Whig bills through Congress, including a new charter for the Bank of the United States. But Tyler didn't share the Whig view.
What happens is really unprecedented, and I don't think it's ever happened since. The Whigs passed 2 laws authorizing a new national bank, and both of them were vetoed by President Tyler. After the second of these vetoes, the Whigs held a meeting at which they expelled President Tyler from their party. And from then on, Tyler was a man without a party.
Politically isolated in the White House, Tyler pressed the business of the nation, while imposing his will and skill as president.
One of the things that Tyler's not really given credit for is his foreign policy achievements. You have the Webster-Ashburton Treaty, which is really a historic treaty between the United States and Great Britain.
This treaty settled the disputed border between the United States and Canada, which was still a British possession.
You also have the annexation of Texas, which is very, very controversial.
Tyler took it upon himself to sign a treaty with the new Republic of Texas. But the treaty was immediately rejected by the Senate. That didn't stop Tyler. He cleverly asked for a joint resolution of Congress, and that passed. Unfortunately, it didn't improve Tyler's sagging political popularity.
I don't really think there was any chance for Tyler to win a second term. He certainly thought about it. I think he wanted it. But the Whigs would have nothing to do with him by 1844, and the Democrats just simply didn't trust him. So he gracefully bows out. It becomes clear that the Democrats have nominated an expansionist like James K. Polk.
In the fall of 1844, Americans elected a new president, a dark horse candidate whom nobody anticipated, but everybody embraced, because he pledged to finish the work that Andrew Jackson had started. Number 11, James K. Polk, Democrat, 1845 to 1849, 49 years old, from Tennessee.
The best way to understand Polk is to understand Jackson. Polk saw himself as someone who was going to fulfill this Jacksonian doctrine. What would Jackson do? This is the mantra that Polk seems to repeat almost every day he's in office.
The Polk administration, in effect, bookends the age of Jackson. He came into office with ample Jacksonian credentials and then achieved a whole series of Jacksonian measures once he got in office.
In many ways, he's perhaps more of a Jacksonian than Jackson is. He believes very, very strongly in this idea of a level playing field for the American people.
I said that Jackson and Polk were wedded at the hip and the head, and I think they were. I don't think if you and I sat down to dinner with the president of our choice, James K. Polk would come in the top 25. I think he was a great president, but that doesn't mean that he was a likable man. He also was quite a devious man.
In contrast to his personality, Polk was probably the most accessible president in U.S. history.
The White House, for all intents and purposes, in the 1840s is a community center for the rather small village of Washington. The Marine Corps Band plays on the White House lawn every Wednesday, and this is open to the public. Polk also makes himself available twice a week to American citizens, and all that was required was to knock on the White House door and to give your card to the steward and to wait your turn. Polk really does see himself as the first servant of the people.
Polk is often called the hardest working president in U.S. history. He was known for his long workdays and had gas lights installed in the White House so he could work through the night.
Polk was a hands-on micromanager as president. For example, he was the first president to really get deeply into the budget. He was the first president to tell all the heads of all the departments, look, don't send your budget requests straight to Congress. Send them to me.
More than anything, James K. Polk wanted to fulfill the ideological promise of Andrew Jackson's presidency, what was then being called America's manifest destiny.
He embodies it, this idea that the United States has a providential destiny to expand westward is something that he accepts implicitly.
To Polk, manifest destiny was more than an idea. It was his presidential mandate.
Polk had 4 goals, which he was dedicated to achieving in his 4 years as president. He said he would only serve 1 term. He wanted to settle the controversy between the United States and Great Britain over the Oregon Territory. He wanted to bring California into the United States. He wanted to set up an independent treasury to fix the credit mess that had prevailed since Jackson. And he wanted to lower tariffs on imports into the American economy.
To achieve his economic goals, Polk pressured Congress to lower the federal tariff and to establish an independent treasury. He succeeded. To achieve his territorial goals, he used force. First, he threatened war with Great Britain to gain the Oregon Territory.
The cry was raised, 54-40 or fight, 54th parallel, 54-40 or fight. And to his credit, he did not draw the line in the sand on that, end up in the 49th parallel.
Then he actually went to war with Mexico to settle the Texas border and acquire the Southwest and California. The Mexican War, fought between 1846 and 1848, came to dominate Polk's administration. And that, along with the acquisition of the Oregon Territory, became the legacy of his presidency.
People don't remember, I'm sorry to say, that Polk's greatness as a president has to do directly with the fact that in 4 years he did take the country from just west of the Mississippi all the way to the Pacific Ocean. From sea to shining sea, a ringing phrase, Polk gave it to us. He made us a continental nation.